Are you ready for the ECP? Using the ECP screening test. What is the ECP screening test? Well, first of all, it comprises the listening and GCVR sections of the ECP. It is designed to be a useful tool for teachers, intended to be administered at the beginning or middle of the academic year. It gives an indication of the current level of students in order to predict how well they may perform on the ECP. It shows which parts of the ECP test students may have a better performance in, and it gives a visual indication of whether a student's correct answers form a consistent pattern by comparing the difficulty of the items with the ability of the student. Listening and GCVR items. Each item was rated by 12 experienced judges according to the level of difficulty, and the judges' decisions were put into 3 categories of difficulty: easier, medium difficulty, and more difficult. Number of items in each category. Now, this table depicts the number of items, as we said, in each category. Indicatively, 25 of the 50 listening items, so that's 50%, and 60 of the 120 GCVR items, that's 50% once again, were categorized as being of medium difficulty. 15 of the 50 listening items, that's 30%, and 27 of the 120 GCVR items, that's 23%, were placed in the difficult category. The ECP Screening Test Grid. This grid can be found in the ECP Screening Test Booklet. Each part of the grid represents a section of the ECP, for example, listening part 1, grammar, and so on. Each section has 3 columns: easier, medium, harder. Numbers on the grid represent item numbers on the test. Item numbers are placed in columns which show how difficult the item is. For example, item 114 in the vocabulary section below is of medium difficulty, item 116 is harder, while items 113 and 115 are easier. Using the ECP screening test grid. Print or photocopy the ECP screening test grid for your students. After students finish the test under test conditions, each item on the grid which was answered correctly should be circled. Interpreting the grid, example 1. So let's have a look at the table. In the closed section, the student has answered correctly 4 out of 5 easier items, 2 out of 10 medium items, and 1 out of 5 more difficult items. The level of the student for this section is below the expected level. Only 2 medium difficulty items were answered correctly, and the 1 correctly answered difficult item may be due to guessing. Let's have a look at another example, example 2. So in the closed section, the student has answered correctly 4 out of 5 easier items, 7 out of 10 medium items, and 1 out of 5 more difficult items. The level of the student for this section is at the expected level. We can see that almost all the easier items were answered correctly. The one mistake made may be due to carelessness. A large number of the medium-level items were answered correctly, and the one more difficult item answered correctly shows that the student is beginning to gain competence above the level. Let's have a look at another example for interpreting the grid, example 3. So in the closed section, the student has answered correctly 5 out of 5 easier items, 8 out of 10 medium items, and 3 out of 5 more difficult items. The level of the student for this section is above the expected level. We can see that the student answered all easier items correctly. Only 2 medium difficulty items were answered incorrectly, and more than half of the difficult items were answered correctly. And let's have a look at a final example for interpreting the grid, example 4. So in the closed section, the student has answered half of the items correctly, but these are 2 out of 5 easier items, 5 out of 10 medium items, and 4 out of 5 more difficult items. The pattern of correct answers for this section is random and may be due to guessing. We can see that more medium and difficult items were answered correctly than easier items. We can also see that almost all the difficult items were answered correctly, even though only half of the medium items were answered correctly. And the pattern of mostly correct answers in the middle may indicate copying. Concluding. So, predicting success at the ECP. Students can be expected to be in a favorable position to improve their English in order to gain a pass at the ECP if they have more than 25 correct answers in the screening test listening section and 60 correct answers in the screening test GCVR section. Teachers can use the patterns of correct answers to identify which sections of the ECP their students need to focus more on. Teachers and students should note that success on the screening test can only indicate success at the ECP provided that students continue to study and improve their English.